Back now with the panel. Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Yamiche Alcindor, Kristen Welker, NBC News White House correspondent, and NBC News special correspondent, senior correspondent, Tom Brokaw. You're special, too. I'm so and special, senior, all those things.
I just didn't want to be the kind of, special. Isn't that special? I'm unqualified in terms of being senior.
That's fair enough. I always prefer Grand Poobah as the official title for you. I'm an old Flintstones kid. So anyway, let me put up these headlines. Some conservative news organizations. Trump lost a shutdown, says the American Conservative Daily Caller. Trump caves. National Review, Trump blinks. Eric Erickson writes this on Friday in USA Today. This is undoubtedly the weakest moment of President Trump's tenure in office. The president may be the commander-in-chief of the American military, but Nancy Pelosi now looks like the commander-in-chief of Donald Trump. All right, Hugh, you've been hearing from the base, I'm sure. How bad is this for the president?
Not that bad. This is very premature. Tom and I will remember that Joe Frazier won his first fight with Muhammad Ali and lost the next two. We will remember that they went 41 out of a scheduled 42 rounds. This is the first round of a 42-round fight. And I point out that the president's approval rating is now higher than Ronald Reagan's was at the same time in his presidency and 40 points lower than George H.W. Bush's was at the time in the presidency from the Meet the Press poll. And I looked at your word cloud, and the Meet the Press word cloud said, sad, no compromise. What I heard from your two guests is that there is the potential to go big and solve not just DACA, but everything.
Kristen, though, you're at this White House. Is he ready to buck? He got so defensive Saturday morning. No, it's not a cave.
Right. And the White House is defiant. This was not a cave. But the reality is he knows that his base is not going to be happy unless he gets funding for the wall. And so if you talk to a lot of allies, they say, we don't see how this ends in any other way other than a national emergency because he can't shut down the government. Again, here's the lesson, I think, for President Trump. He went into this fight without any strategy, without any plan. And so every day, essentially, the president, the White House, they were looking for an off-ramp and instead of trying to execute something that they'd already planned out very carefully. And I think they're right now huddling, trying to figure out how to do it differently, how to make a better use of the bully pulpit, Chuck. He didn't really do that in this fight.
You'll recall everybody that knew Trump for a long time said he actually enjoys not having a plan.
Right.
He goes into battle and plan B's damned. Tom Brokaw, a month ago, we were asking the question, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? I want to put up some quotes here from people that weren't always so supportive of Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker again. AOC, Speaker Pelosi doesn't mess around. Tim Ryan, who challenged her. She's definitely up to the task. And then her home state governor, Gavin Newsom, grateful for our champion in Washington, Speaker Pelosi. I think it's undoubted. The Democrats have a leader. It's Nancy Pelosi.
Well, the fact is that going into this last election, I've known her a long time. She's obviously a very smart woman. I wondered whether she was the best image for the Democratic Party. And a lot of people pushed back, said she really knows how to run things on the Hill. I think she demonstrated that this past week. Donald Trump treated federal employees like poker chips. Only this time his father wasn't around to bail him out. And I think that hurt him more, by the way, than people realize. That was a whole crowd of people out there who were probably voted for him, a number of them. And suddenly they what they do is get their job jerked out from under them. I spoke to a Midwestern senator who said now it's creeped into agriculture because at this time of the year, the farmers are dealing with government agencies to plan for next year's crop. There was no one home to do all that. So the damage was really more systemic, I think, than a lot of people realize, Chuck.
Yamiche, ironically, the one piece of agreement I'm getting from everybody this morning is I think they're going to eliminate the shutdown. I think the legislative momentum, the good news about getting nothing for 35 days might be that.
I mean, this is the longest shutdown in history, 35 days, and people were, I think, at a fever pitch. The fact that the airports were starting to really show signs of stress, I think, was just the beginning of what we would have seen. I was talking to a federal worker this weekend who said Monday, people might not have showed up to work. Thousands more people would have been like, I cannot do this anymore. I want to think about the fact that we talk about President Trump not having a plan. Let's think about what he did for 35 days. He had a primetime special. He went down to the border. He then was possibly disseminating all this misleading information about the fact that there were drugs pouring in, that our country was being invaded, and after all of that stuff, the polls were showing that the president was the one being blamed because he was on video because of Chuck Schumer saying, "I will own the shutdown."
Is that the lesson here for the president? The bully pulpit for him is starting to no longer be useful?
Well, I think that's the question, right? I think part of their strategy, and you heard Leader McCarthy speak to this, they're going to try to pick off some Democrats. The White House can't name any. He named a few, and there's a lot of skepticism about that strategy actually working. But look, he didn't deliver that primetime address until halfway into the shutdown. So a lot of his allies say, look, if he had started off in the weeks beforehand, really selling this, really trying to make his case, that would have helped. The question is going to be about semantics with this potential compromise they're looking for. Can they find a word or a phrase that allows him to declare victory on the wall and Democrats as well?
This isn't a one-story town. In the middle of this 3 weeks, Roger Stone happens Friday, Tom. Let me put up here. I mean, look, the people in and around the Trump campaign that have either pleaded guilty or been indicted, it's a who's who of people that have been around this president. Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Roger Stone now, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos. That doesn't help your bully pulpit abilities either.
No, especially given his image whenever he goes on television. I've known him a long time. He's always been dealing in the kind of frenetic fringe of the Republican Party and making himself out to be more than he really is. I watched him the other day with his beret and his sunglasses on, and I thought, perfect person would be Marty Short to play him in some kind of a stage play.
Well, they got Steve Martin to do it on SNL last night, so his partner in crime there.
Right.
Yeah. But Roger Stone is one of these people that sometimes you think, did he insert himself into this, Hugh? But then again, he knows stuff about Trump that nobody else does.
Yeah, the Supreme Court often takes judicial notice of what's happening, and the Trump campaign was taking judicial notice of what Roger Stone was saying. That indictment, which I read on the air on my radio show because it broke when it came out, does not yet support but does not preclude real collusion. Right. We have to find out who campaign official 1 and 2 is, what they said, and I think those people might be going to jail along with Roger Stone.
Well, and the campaign official, boy, Rick Gates smells like one of them. Well, and he may be cooperating.
Absolutely. And I think it chips away at the White House, the president's argument that this doesn't touch him. Strewn throughout that indictment are references to the Trump campaign, although not a direct link to Russia. You're absolutely right.
All right.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.